dia, pessoal. Nós estamos dando início ao nosso primeiro Keynote do CIBS 2020. Antes de eu entrar na apresentação do Keynote, eu queria falar um pouquinho da dinâmica para vocês. Então, a dinâmica que a gente vai trabalhar nesse Keynote, enquanto o Keynote está sendo feito, vai ser feito em inglês, vocês podem ficar à vontade para colocar comentários, colocar perguntas nos chats do YouTube ou do Facebook. E esses comentários podem ser colocados em inglês, em português ou em espanhol, que são as 3 línguas oficiais do CIBS 2020. Ao final do Keynote, eu vou entrar ler as perguntas e entrar novamente no ar para fazer as perguntas para a nossa palestrante. E um ponto importante é que eu combinei com a palestrante que ela vai fazer uma pausa perto do final do Keynote. Então, nessa pausa já vai ser possível fazer perguntas. Então, vocês não precisam esperar terminar o Keynote para começar a fazer as perguntas. Vocês podem fazer as perguntas durante o andamento do Keynote. Bom, agora eu vou passar para o inglês para poder apresentar a Keynote para vocês. Eu vou pedir para a organização trazer a Margaret e trazer os slides também. So, Professor Margaret Burnett has a vast CV that would hardly fit in few minutes, but I'd like to highlight some key aspects to our audience. Professor Burnett is a distinguished professor at Oregon State University. She began her career in industry. She was the first woman software developer ever hired at Procter & Gamble, Iverdale. She co-founded the area of end-user software engineering, which aims at improving software such as spreadsheets created and maintained by computer users that are not trained in programming. And she leads the team that created GenderMag, the topic of today's talk. GenderMag is a method to find and fix gender inclusiveness issues in software from spreadsheets to programming environment. GenderMag is already being used in South America, and Brazil was the first country in South America to adopt GenderMag. Besides the keynotes of Professor Burnett, we will also have a hands-on tutorial on Friday. I have already announced this tutorial in the opening, and due to the characteristics of the tutorial, which we are going to try out the method, it's a hands-on tutorial, we need to accommodate a smaller number of participants in a more dynamic way. So we are going to use Zoom instead of StreamYard and YouTube and Facebook. The sessions will not be recorded, so if you really want to be part of the tutorial, this tutorial you need to be registered and you need to participate online using Zoom. So if you intend to attend the tutorial on Friday, please register in the form. The organization is going to provide the link to the form in YouTube and Facebook chat. Moreover, I'd like to ask you to download the material in advance in CIBS website, because it's going to be a hands-on tutorial. So I'd like to deeply thank Professor Burnett for being always receptive in serving our community. I'm going to provide you a bit of clue what happens in the organization of CIBS 2020. We first invited Professor Burnett as an ACM distinguished speaker to deliver the keynote in May 2020, here in Brazil, actually at Curitiba. She promptly accepted the invitation. And due to the pandemic, we tried first to move the conference to November, but still in Curitiba. And again, Professor Burnett accepted to change the dates. And then we figured out that the pandemic was much bigger than we thought initially. And we decided to move CIBS online. And once again, Professor Burnett accepted to be here with us. And now it's 5 a.m. in Oregon. So thank you very much, Professor Burnett, to be here. And we are very, very happy to have the opportunity to hear from you. So I'd like to invite everybody from YouTube and to Facebook to help me welcome Professor Burnett in her keynote. Thank you.
Let's see, am I up?
Yes.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yes. Okay. Well, thank you very much for inviting me, Leo, and everyone. It's really strange to be giving a talk in this kind of environment. I've noticed that the that the facial expressions that I'm giving are lagging behind what I say. So the sound and my mouth are going to be, I guess, a little out of sync. Sorry about that. I'm very sorry that I couldn't be with you in Brazil. I've only been to South America one time, and it was Brazil. It was a little south of Sao Paulo. I had a wonderful time, and I wish I could be there now. But it's especially fitting that this talk and this conference are in Brazil, because Brazil is one of the few countries, and in fact was the pioneer to start using GenderMag, which is the main topic of this talk. So you have sort of led the beginning of the spread, maybe through South America. We'll see. So, all right, let's get started then. Gender inclusive design. Sorry, you're getting my it's 5 a.m. voice. Let me see if I can get some of the scratches out. So, gender inclusive design. What does gender have to do with software anyway? How do these relate? Well, it turns out that most software has what we call gender bias bugs in it. So here is a worried software developer, and this developer, let's see, can you see this? Oh my, there's quite a lag here. I'll wait for the screen to catch up. Let's see, it's waiting. Here is a worried software developer, and they are worried that that their very busy workload is just about to get busier because they already have plenty of bugs to solve, and so they're hoping they don't have to do anything about it. And this software developer asks me, "You're kidding? Where are these bugs?" And the answer is in the software that person creates and in the tools they use to do it. So the software developer is still worried and is still thinking about their busy workload. And they ask, well, does this really matter? I mean, how much does it matter? And the answer is it matters a lot, because every time that a user starts to experience one of these bias bugs, they experience what you can think of as a cognitive tax, a sapping of the mental strength that comes out of your head every time a user encounters one of these bugs. So that's bad, but it's not the only reason why we'd like to fix these bugs. Another reason is that whenever you fix any kind of bug in software, you get better software. And this is particularly true. It's been discovered in the design community that if you pay attention to a particularly underserved population and solve the problems that affect them, you end up with a much better product for everyone. The classic example of this is curb cuts, those kind of cutout places in the sidewalk. So a long time ago, maybe before some of you were born, there were no curb cuts on sidewalks. And somebody noticed how much trouble people in wheelchairs were having when they tried to use sidewalks because there were no curb cuts. Just going to wait for the screen to catch up. There we are. There's someone in a wheelchair, the way things were. And so curb cuts were born. Actually, there's an interesting story involving dynamite behind that, but you can ask me about that in the chat if you want to. Anyway, they were born and they did help people in wheelchairs, so that's great. And they helped people with those walkers that have wheels on the bottom of them too. And they helped, waiting for the screen here. Just going to give it a minute. There's the screen. Okay. And they also helped people with those walkers with wheels on them, and they helped people pushing babies in their strollers, and they helped people on bicycles, and they helped people pushing heavy bales of hay on their wheeled dollies, and they helped people who have suitcases, heavy suitcases that go on wheels. I'll just wait for the screen. I think the screen, this is very odd. Sorry, there's a problem. There we are. Oh, I don't need to wait for the screen. Okay, they're synced. All right, very good. Okay, so hopefully now I have all of this to the point where you really, really care about fixing these bias bugs. And so I want to tell you what not to do about them. Okay, so we want to fix this. What do we not do? What you don't want to do is shrink it and pink it. This is a thing. You don't want to do it. It is not a good strategy. We know this because people have tried it. By the way, shrink it and pink it, that's a real expression. You can find lots of examples of it on Google if you start searching around. Anyway, here's the first terrible example. This was Dell's pink laptops. It happened in 2009, and that's a long time ago. That's before Twitter. Anyway, keep that in mind, before Twitter. So here's a picture of Dell's pink laptops. Somebody at Dell decided it'd be awesome to get more money from women buying their laptops. So they decided to paint it pink and to come up with a special website to go with it, with like recipes and things like that. So this was their brainy idea. Here come the laptops and the website. Just guess, you can do this in the chat if you want. Just guess how long before Twitter it took for the company to become so embarrassed they took that website down. This is before Twitter. Guess how long? Leo, is there anything in the chat? Any guesses?
Yeah, we have a small delay to YouTube. So if you present, it's okay. People are going to watch you and the audio at the same time. But if you ask a question, people will take 30 seconds, more or less, to provide an answer to the question. So yeah, yet we do not have any answer in the chat.
Okay, I'll move on then.
Okay.
If anything you might have guessed is probably too long. You might have guessed a month, way too long. You might have guessed a week, way too long. You might have guessed a day. Nope, too long. They became so embarrassed, they took that website down in 20 minutes. Only 20 minutes. That's how long it took. The next example of shrink it and pink it is Bic for Her. This one also goes back a very long time, but it's still on the market, unfortunately. So somebody at Bic decided it would be awesome to sell more pens to women. And so they decided to add pink and purple to their colors and sparklies and a label for her and to raise the price. Maybe some of you have seen the Ellen blog post. Ellen is a talk show host talking about Bic for Her. It starts out like this. Here's a picture of my hand in front of my face. Oh, my feeble hand. Before Bic for Her, I couldn't write my own recipes. I had to ask my husband to do it. But now, okay, so these kinds of solutions are truly terrible. They're terrible on so many levels. They're disrespectful. They're just completely misguided, but on top of everything else, they can't work. There is no way they can work. And here's why. It's because nobody is typical. Being a member of some gender is a very complicated proposition with many, many variables. And so no two members of any gender are exactly the same. There's nobody that's typical. So the world doesn't divide into typical, quote, men and women. And so the solution can't lie in dividing people up. Where it has to lie is to think about these things as a debugging problem, not a dividing problem. So this is the key point. Taking down these kinds of barriers that affect one gender more than another in software is about debugging. Okay, so where do these bugs lurk? What kind of software has these kinds of bias bugs? Well, it turns out pretty much everywhere. Open source projects, yes, many of these gender bias bugs are there, and there are several papers that talk about these. So if you're academic or a researcher, you can easily find them. Programming environments, oh yes, many papers about those. By the way, they aren't all written by me. Spreadsheets, yes, many papers about those. E-learning systems, well, there are papers about all of these. E-learning systems, robots, mobile apps, help systems even, websites, digital libraries, okay? They are everywhere. And they're also in what I call academia-ware. So what's that? Those of us who are affiliated with universities, and I understand that lots of you in the audience know that to do pretty much anything nowadays with our university, we use IT. We fill out forms, we use spreadsheets that we send over email, we go to websites to get information. All of those things also have these same gender bias bugs in them. So what we don't get to do is say, oh, industry should fix things, because we are creating just as many problems in our academia-ware as industry does in the software that they are creating. So one of those universities that has academia-ware, like everyone else, is Oregon State. That's my university. And we've been working with them to find out just how pervasive these bugs are, and they're everywhere. And so it's time to clean up our own houses. And I'm very proud to say that Oregon State is one of the ones that has decided to do something about that. So we're working with the people on the IT side of the university who create the admission applications and the registration systems and the web pages and all of those things to help them start thinking of this as a debugging problem and figure out how to debug it. There's a little pie chart on this slide that shows one of the teams and how many of these gender bias bugs they found. We'll come back to this pie chart later, but that's just one example of the kinds of things you can measure with GenderMag. And so let's talk about GenderMag. GenderMag is a process, it's a method you use. It's not a product, but just a process you use on how you go about finding and fixing these gender bugs. So we start by picking one of the personas that gets that you can download in the GenderMag kit, all of which, by the way, is free. You can get to everything you want from gendermag.org. Anyway, so you pick a persona. This is one of the personas provided. So I'm going to pick this one. Her name is Abby. And you pick some kind of use case or scenario in the software that you're trying to evaluate. So in this example, we're going to use this little app. It's like a Google map for inside a bookstore. So it's a way to get around in a bookstore. This is a little app that some of my students were working on. So we'll use that as our example. And the use case or scenario that we're going to walk our way through here is find science fiction books. So our starting point is Abby wants to find science fiction books in this app. So we pick that persona and that use case, and then we walk through the sub-goal with the way that the developers of this app were hoping their users would do. So it works like this. We start by asking the developers, in this case it was my students, what do you wish Abby would want to do first to try to get to a map, to try to find science fiction books? And so what the developer said is, when Abby is looking at this screen, what we wish she would have in her head is, I want to see a map. So that's what the developers are hoping is in their user's head. And then the GenderMag process simply asks the question, will this persona, Abby, have formed this sub-goal? Oh, by the way, in case you don't know about personas, a persona is a fictional person based on data, and we'll get to know these personas soon. Anyway, will Abby have formed this sub-goal? This is what we ask ourselves, and we answer yes, no, maybe, and why. If some of you have heard of a cognitive walkthrough, you'll start to recognize what this process is, because it is a specialized version of a cognitive walkthrough. Anyway, and I have certain things in red to show how we've specialized it for finding gender biases. So the evaluators answer yes, no, maybe, and why. Why do we have a maybe here? Well, one of the things about what GenderMag is trying to do is make software inclusive to everyone. And so if we want that to happen, we need the process to be inclusive too. So we don't care if everyone in the room agrees on an answer like yes or no or maybe. We just want to collect all the opinions of all the evaluators and write them down. So we're looking for a union of answers to this question, not a consensus. And the really important thing is, once they answer, we want to know why. The specialized part of the walkthrough points you to particular aspects of our persona. Here it's pointing to motivations as a particular thing to consider in answering these questions. And we'll see more about what these personas look like shortly. Anyway, we answer this question, we write everything down, and then we make Abby have this sub-goal. So even if she didn't have it before, now she does, because she's a fictional person and we can make her think anything we want. So now she wants to see a map. And then we ask the developers, what were you hoping she would click on if she wants to see a map? And the developers said, we want her to tap on, browse off. Okay, that may not be the best choice, but that's what they had in mind. And we're evaluating what they wrote, not what they should have written. That's the whole point, is to find what's wrong with it. So they said, we sure hope she's going to tap on browse off. And then we simply ask everyone in the room, will Abby do that? Yes, no, maybe, and why, if she wants to see a map. And so we collect all the opinions. Then, after we write them all down, and this, by the way, is the beginning of our bias bug report, we write them all down, considering particular aspects of Abby, the persona, and then we make her do it. We look at the next screen, which I don't have on this slide, and say, if she does this, will she see progress? Yes, no, maybe, and why. Here's what one evaluator answered to these questions. They said no, because Abby is not inclined to push and poke on things. All right, so what's behind these, the whole method and these personas? It all centers around 5 problem-solving facets. So all of these personas center on their motivations for using this particular kind of software, their information processing style, their computer self-efficacy, which is a particular form of confidence, their risk aversion, and their learning style with technology, whether it's tinkering or something else. So this may be a surprise to everyone here, because notice we're not talking about anything like how many children they have and whether or not they're married and where they live. We're not talking about any of those things or the colors they like. We're talking about the way they problem solve. And the way we call these 5 core things facets. And the way we bring these facets to life is with the personas. You've just seen a little bit of Abby. Let's take a look at Abby in more detail. So here's Abby. This is all of Abby. I don't want you to try to read all this right now. All I want you to notice so far is that this persona, Abby, fits on one screen. Some of you who have experience with personas may have seen personas that go on for several pages. One of our goals in creating GenderMag was to make this very efficient for software developers who are very, very busy. So we made it fit on one page. We have bullets, underlines to call out the important things. So that's why Abby is the way she is. And actually, as you can also see, Abby doesn't have to be a she. So I've just added a horizontal line, and above the line, all of this is customizable. So if a software developer is working on, let's say some version of Facebook, they might want different demographics. They may not want to start off with someone who lives in Wales. They may not want to have an accountant. So all of these things could be different picture, different gender. The pronouns are completely customizable. Pretty much everything above the line, with just a couple of exceptions, are customizable. Below the line is fixed. You can't change any of these. These are Abby's problem-solving styles. You can see again, here's this list: motivations, computer self-efficacy, risk, and so on. Abby has one particular set of values for each of these. The other personas we offer have different values. So the same types, motivations, self-efficacy, but different values. Let's look at one of them. Facet number 1, we're going to look at risk. So Abby is really busy. She has no spare time. So she's risk averse about using unfamiliar technologies that might need her to spend extra time on them. So all of our facets are backed by at least 5 independent studies. I'm going to show you only one, though, because it would take too much time to show 5. So this is some data on about 1,000 customers of some industry's product about men's and women's attitude toward risks with technologies. And in that particular sample, we had only those 2 genders. So the first thing I want you to notice is look how much overlap there is between these 2 genders. They have many, many things in common. And so that's another way to say what I said earlier. You can't divide the world up into typical people, because they don't divide up and there isn't anyone typical. The different genders have a lot in common. But here's the other thing I want you to notice. Look how different the distributions of these data are. And so when we talk about statistical differences among genders, for example, here, men and women, this is what we're talking about, is that the data is distributed very differently. So here's Tim, one of our personas, and Tim's job is to look out for the interests of all of the risk-tolerant people in this sample. Abby's job is to look out for the interests of all of these risk-averse people in this sample. And Pat's job is to pick up all of these people in the middle of this risk facet. Now, I'm going to add a vertical line here. Here it is. Suppose, hypothetically, that you were looking at software that supported only people on this side of the line, on the Tim side of the line. How many men would be excluded from having a good experience with that software? A little over half, okay, because only 42% of this sample were risk tolerant. How about how many women? About 3/4 would be excluded. That's why we say that there are gender biases, because not these facets, ignoring these facets like risk, disproportionately can affect one gender way more than another. And by the way, this example we just gave is not hypothetical. Most software is on this side of the line. Now, I've presented these facets as though they're fixed characteristics that someone has. Actually, they're not so fixed. They can vary with a different situation. And also, we've set up Abby so that she's way over here on her information processing style, way over here on her attitude toward risk. Let's look at another woman, though, that some of you may know. Her name is Anita Sarma, and she's one of my colleagues on the GenderMag project. She's also a professor at Oregon State. So here's where she falls on this spectrum. So for her information processing style, she's exactly the opposite as Abby. But for her computer self-efficacy compared to her peers, she's right there together with Abby. For her attitude toward risk, she's more in the middle, and so on and so forth. So every person has a different place on this spectrum. Nobody is typical, but if you can support in one version of software, somebody here and somebody here, now you have inclusive software, and that's what you want. You want to be able to support somebody here, and therefore everybody in the middle. And taking down those bugs is how you do it. So how pervasive are these kinds of bias bugs in the real world? Well, the answer is very pervasive. So here is some data from 17 real-world teams who used GenderMag to analyze their own software to find out how many of these bias bugs they found. The smallest number in these 17 was 12%. So what that says is that team, they analyzed their own software, and 12% of the features they looked at, they found these bias bugs, and that's the smallest number. Look over here, 100%. Every single thing they looked at, they found bias bugs. The average blew me away. 1/3 of everything they looked at had these bias bugs in it. Here's a new fun one. I particularly like this one. We learned about this last summer. This one, there's this organization in the US called CS for All, Computer Science for All, and its mission is to bring the ability to do computer science to so many more people, and to counteract the kinds of biases that have interfered with people being able to use software. One of those products by one of those member organizations, 60% of what they looked at, they found gender bias bugs. But it's not that hard to fix them once you find them. So the key is to know what to look for, and that's what GenderMag helps you do. So people have started using this process. You've seen what it looked like already from that little walkthrough we did with the map for inside a bookstore. Some teams have started figuring out kind of best practices on how to get the most for their time that they spend doing one of these things. We published this paper just last spring in ICSE, the premier software engineering conference, and I'll show you a few of these practices that some of the teams out there in the real world came up with. So one of them is abstracting beyond the user interface. So as you saw, when we walk through a GenderMag session, things are very concrete. It's as concrete as like running a test. You have a specific pattern through the UI that you're evaluating, no other patterns, a particular path and particular outcomes. And so they were trying to figure out, well, how can we kind of abstract above that so that so that we don't have to run it on every single user interface we have. And they came up with the idea of evaluating these patterns that they had embedded in the user interface. And so there was a common pattern that they had in a lot of their applications, and they realized that if they evaluated just that pattern, that their results would apply to all the user interfaces that use that pattern. So that turned out to be very efficient for them. And by the way, you can read about that in this paper we published in ICSI if you want to know more. Another one that the teams have found to be very effective is calculating their bias percent. So here's that pie chart that I promised to show you before. This is from a team at OSU who did an evaluation. And so they did a GenderMag evaluation. And the good news is 46% of what they looked at, they did not find any bias bugs. So that's great. 3% of what they looked at, they found sort of general usability bugs, things that aren't specific to or aren't disproportionate to any particular gender, things like, oh, the font's too small. So 3% of what they looked at, they found this. But 51% of what they looked at were the kinds of problems that we saw when we walked through that bookstore application that would disproportionately affect one gender more than another because of those facets. In the case of the bookstore example, it was because Abby was not going to push on that button because her learning style isn't tinkering. And here is the best practice of all. So once you find these bugs using GenderMag, then you know how to fix them, because the facets, the thing that enabled you to find it, also tell you how to fix it. And so back to the bookstore example, remember that Abby wouldn't push on browse off because she's not a tinkerer, and browse off doesn't seem to have anything to do with seeing a map. And so her learning style, not tinkering, would tell us what we might need to do to fix it. Maybe it's change the label so that she can see that that'll get her toward where she wants to go. Or maybe if it were a desktop application, we could add a tooltip so that she would understand that that's it instead of just having to poke around on everything. So facets drive fixes. I'm going to show you an example here. This is from a Microsoft product, which they allowed us to write about. So that's kind of awesome. This is what it looked like before, and I know you can't read it, so don't worry about it. But I'm blowing up the part that I want you to look at. So this is a search product similar to Google Scholar, but it's called Microsoft Academic Search. And so here they want to search for, I guess, something to do with top institutions. So this is what it looked like before they used the GenderMag evaluation. Then they evaluated it. They found some problems. And so here's what it looks like after. So let's look at those differences and see how facets drive fixes. So one thing you can notice is the length of the old version was 10. Now the length of the new version is 5 with a more at the bottom of both. Why? Well, we found this problem with information processing style. Abby is a comprehensive information processor, which means she'll read everything, but it turned out that reading everything is really not going to help her get to where she needs to go. Tim is a selective information processor, which means he reads very little, and so when faced with a wall of stuff like this, he's not very excited. So that was why when the Microsoft people realized that, they shortened it to this: facets drive fixes, information processing style. Here's another problem they found. Before, this had numbers. Now it doesn't. Why? The facet was motivations. So with these numbers here, all of this looks like a data visualization. It doesn't look like something actionable. But in fact, what it was meant to be is is something you take actions on. And these numbers were not helpful for what the widget is for anyway. So they took the numbers down. And what that does is it makes really clear this is a checkbox thing. You're just supposed to check on whichever one you want to explore more. They took that down. They found it with the motivations facet, which was Abby was in here to get something done. Okay, so let's take another look at all of the fixes they did. What you just saw here, that was issues 1 and 2. So let's take a look there. You just saw some of the redesigns that they did, the things they fixed. Motivations, that was for Abby. These orange check marks are Abby. You also saw me talk about information processing style. Those changes were for both Abby and Tim. So they did evaluations on both of them. Look at the effects over here. So the change they made because it was discriminating, it was disproportionately affecting the Abbies, helped both the Abbies and the Tims. We're very happy about that. That's like curb cuts territory, helping everyone. That's exactly what we want. Over here on the information processing fix, what we can see is it helped the Abbies, and we know this because of empirical work we did to measure Abbies and Tims. We don't know if it helped the Tims because the Tims didn't have any problem either way. So that's what this asterisk means. Let's see. So I've just talked about these situations where things turn out even better than we expected, like curb cuts territory. That's awesome when we get something like that. Now let's talk about something else that's less rosy. So here's a different issue. They fixed it for the Abbies, and things did get better for the Abbies, so we're glad about that, but they got worse for the Tims. All right, we do not want this. Inclusivity is not about sacrificing one gender to help another. It's about making things better for everyone. So we never want to be in this trade-off territory. Let's see. Another thing, they fixed it for Abby. It got worse for the Abbies and better for the Tims. So that just tells you, hey, people are human, including the people who did these fixes, and they just kind of didn't do it right that time. It happens. Now I want to focus a little bit more on the risk facet. And so let's go on to issue 4 and focus specifically on the risk facet. So what we have here, this is empirical results from that same experiment. This is the original version that they evaluated with people. And so they had 10 participants in this group. And this is after they fixed it. They had 10 different people in this group. First thing I want you to notice is in the first group, there was someone who was a pure Abby. All 5 of their facets were Abby facets. Down here, you can see that each group also had a pure Tim, somebody who had all Tim facets, both in the original and then another person in the post-GenderMag version. But mostly, people were a mixture of these facets, just like I showed you earlier in that slide with Anita Sarma versus Abby. That's what you expect. Now, the only people in here are people who experienced action failures. So what you'd like is these dashes, people who didn't have any trouble. So we're going to look at just the risk facet here. So in the original version of issue 4, you can see that 2 Abbies on the risk facet and 4 Tims on the risk facet ran into trouble with the original. Over here in the new version, we can see that no Abbies and only 2 Tims ran into trouble with it. So what that shows us is their fixes made things better for both Abbies on the Tim facet or on the risk facet and Tims, and that's what we want. So it's been a long time since we've talked about gender. We've been talking about problem-solving styles instead. So let's take a look at how the genders of people in that experiment came out according to these facets. So over here, this side of the the linear scale is people with 5 Abby facets. And there was only one person like that. And I've colored that bar yellow because that person was a woman. Here are people who had 4 Abby facets and 1 Tim facet. There were 4 people like that. Here is somebody, are the people who had 3 Abby facets and 2 Tim facets. We can see that both men and women came in that category. I think there were 2 of each, and so on. So one thing to notice here is, just as I've showed you before, nobody's typical. Women were all over in all of these different combinations of facets. Men were also fairly widely distributed, but as you can see, the women skew closer to Abby, the men skew closer to Tim, and so that's why those facets that we've set up for Abby and Tim, although they're all about being inclusive across different problem-solving styles, they're also about gender. So what about those fixes? How did they come out by gender? Well, in the original version of that software, when they gave people in the lab the main use case tasks for that software, women failed the tasks more than twice as often as the men. In the new version that they fixed to make gender inclusive, everybody got better and the gender gap disappeared. That's what we want. Isn't that awesome? I spent the whole summer showing everybody that graph. I was so excited by it. So, as I've said, GenderMag is all about inclusivity. So to be inclusive now, what I'd like to do is pause and answer questions that you have about GenderMag or about my talk or about anything, and then I'll go on with the last part of the talk.
Thank you, Margaret. We have lots of feedback in YouTube. Some people are not asking questions. Some people are just saying the keynote is lovely and so on. And after the keynotes, you can visit the chat and check the comments. But there are some few questions. I'd like to ask the staff to bring the question here. One of them is, from Soraya. She's asking which technique your group uses for running GenderMag, and if it's only focused on quantitative research. I think that the answer go in the direction of attending the tutorial, but okay, it's up to you.
Yeah, thank you. That's a very good question. We use a lot of techniques in our GenderMag research. And so it all started with us doing a lot of paper reading. So we started reading theories from psychology and education and sociology and feminist literature and everywhere we could find out about gender differences that were relevant to problem solving, because that's mostly what people do with software is problem solve. And from those, we then kind of got hypotheses about how those ought to play out when we have particular software products involved. And so we brought those into the lab and we started experimenting to see whether the gender differences that, like psychologists said, that we thought should show up in software usage, whether they did. And the answer was yes. So there we have quantitative lab studies. We also did qualitative lab studies in which so that we could really find out and dig more deeply into why certain things were arising and how they were arising. So it was a great mix of bringing theory to bear on our original formation of what should be important here, and then lab studies both in the lab or both quantitative and qualitative, and pretty soon other people started doing experiments on these too. So now there's a literature that's way more than just by us that's investigated these things. And finally then we said, well, we have to figure out how to make all this stuff practical so that software developers can really use it. And that's when we came up with the method itself. Before that, we were just writing papers about the phenomenon. but then we distilled it all into this method that you see here and tested it in the field. So yeah, that's how we did it.
Yeah, we have another question by Tayana. She asked the best way to present GenderMag to undergrad students. Do you have any suggestion?
I certainly do. So thank you for that question. If you go to the GenderMag site, gendermag.org, there's a tab or a link called GenderMag Teach. And it's specifically set up to answer questions like that. And so this is a community of people who are teaching GenderMag at their colleges and universities inside their classes. And we have sample lectures, and we have in-class activities, and we have tips about how to teach it, how to handle things that might come up when you're teaching it, like somebody worrying about stereotyping. And so we have all kinds of resources. They're all free and all available. And if you start using any of these things in your class, we encourage you to let me know so that I can add you to the list that are teaching it so that you can get some publicity for your university. And also, if you have, if you've specialized any of the lectures or come up with your own or your own activities, if you'll share those back, then I can add those to our site so that more people can make use of them. So thank you for that question, and I hope everybody starts teaching it.
Nice. And the last question here is basically asking about interdisciplinary areas that could help bringing some social consciousness to the design. I mean, in opposing to more rational design that we are used to have in software engineering, what should we look outside software engineering to know how to design, keeping the social aspect and keeping the minorities included in our design?
Thank you. That's a wonderful question. There's a rich literature and a whole area called inclusive design, and it's mostly in the human-computer interaction area. But we're starting to see some papers about that also in software engineering conferences. So, but most of it is in human-computer interaction area. So if you search on inclusive design, you'll find lots of literature about ways in the classroom and in practice to make software more inclusive. And the GenderMag team, we are also working on a couple of approaches that make it even easier to get from finding to fixing these kinds of inclusivity bugs. So that can help you as well. And also, the next part of the talk, I'll be talking about how we can expand our shall we say, our intellectual toolkit beyond thinking about just gender inclusivity to other forms of inclusivity. So that's where we're going next in this talk.
Great. Thank you, Margaret. Just to let you know, we passed the 53 minutes from the beginning, but we already had answered some questions. So go ahead, and it's very nice. So do not hurry up. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Yeah, you're welcome. All right. So back to the talk then, where we left off is the whole point is that GenderMag is about inclusivity across various different genders. But what about if we're interested in inclusivity across some other dimension, not having to do with gender? Well, enter InclusiveMag. InclusiveMag. Okay, so, well, hang on, let me have a little drink here. So, so GenderMag was actually invented using the InclusiveMag meta method. GenderMag is for software developers to use, but InclusiveMag is not for software developers to use. It's for researchers to use. And so you can use this to build your own XMag. whether it's GenderMag or AgeMag or VisionMag or whatever. And here's how you do it. And this is the same way we created GenderMag. So it has these steps, and this is what researchers do. And then this is what software practitioners do. GenderMag, what I showed you, was only this side. So let's take a closer look then at what these things look like. So we're going to start with the things that the researchers do to create such a method. You begin by setting the scope. And so we need to select a software type. For us, we selected software for problem solving. That's what we did with GenderMag, but you could maybe, as your software type or genre, you might pick software for learning or software for gaming. So you set whatever kind of software you're interested in improving there. And then you also select the diversity dimension you want to look at. We selected gender for GenderMag, but you could select age for AgeMag, or education for education level mag, or whatever. And out of that work, then you do a lot of formative work. So in answer to the question a few minutes ago, I talked about how we read from psychology and education and all of this literature. So and we ran lab studies. So you do all of that work, and it is a lot. This is why this is for researchers and not for software practitioners. And from that, you get these facets. And these facets are the things that I emphasized so much during the talk. The attitude toward risk, the information processing style. So you get all this from that work. And those facets and facet values are the core of your new method. And as we saw with the GenderMag part of the talk, one of those was the risk facet. Here's that graph we saw before with a bunch of data about that risk facet and how it distributed across different genders. I've used InclusiveMag. I teach an inclusive design class at my university, and so some of my students have used InclusiveMag to create their own mags. And so one group of students created Autism Spectrum Mag. And for them, one of the facets that was very important was somebody's ability to concentrate. Another group created Age Mag. And so what they needed, one of the facets they needed, was memory ability. We didn't need that for GenderMag because men and women, as far as we know, don't have big differences in ability to remember things, but across age, it would be a very important facet. Anyway, so that's what all this research tells you, is where are the important facets for this software type and this diversity dimension. Then, once you have those facets, and that's the hard part, then you construct personas around them, just as we did. So this one is, I think this one is Autism Spectrum Mag. And so some students that were working on that one created a couple of personas. And so here they are, and these are just little excerpts from them. So here is the autistic one. He finds it difficult to concentrate. Here is the non-autistic one. She can multitask. And you specialize some analytic process. We used the, and of course, Abby is, here's Abby's facet. You specialize the analytic process. We used the cognitive walkthrough as our basis and specialized it. But other possibilities are you could use a heuristic evaluation and specialize that. One team used a cognitive walkthrough plus simulation software. So this was a version of VisionMag that one team created. And so besides the cognitive walkthrough, they used a simulator. There are several nice simulators that are available from the University of Cambridge in the UK, their Inclusive Design Lab. And so you can get these for free, I think. And that's what this team did. And then, excuse me. And then finally, you give it to software practitioners who apply the method. So they customize the personas to have the appropriate background for the software to be evaluated. So we had Abby as an accountant who lived in Wales, but Abby could be any age, live anywhere, have any picture. So that part the software developers can do. And they select their scenario and start. just as we did in our bookstore example. And of course, when they apply the method, what they get is an inclusivity bug report that has lots of issues in it, and then they can fix them. Here's this pie graph that you've had before. If they say risk-averse people would have trouble with this step, then they say, well, how can we fix it? So they wouldn't. Anyway, so that's what the software developers do with your new method. And if you're lucky, getting from the facets to the fixes, you end up with graphs like this awesome one that I showed you earlier for GenderMag. So in conclusion then, evidence strongly suggests from lab and fieldwork and real world companies that debiasing your software and any kind of IT really pays off. It pays off in business. This is why industry uses it. It pays off in the classroom, and it pays off with academia-ware and education software and software and web pages, any kind of IT. And it pays off for society. Here's what one person said. It changed the way I think. So yeah. If you'd like to learn about how to do GenderMag hands-on, we have a tutorial this Friday. It's hands-on. You'll actually be doing it, not just sitting there listening to how to do it. And so because of that, we need to do it over Zoom so that we can have breakout rooms. And because Zoom is limited to the number of people we can have, you need to pre-register for that with a link that I think my friends there are about to put in the chat room. And we have to limit it to 90 people because of the Zoom limitations. So if you're interested in learning how to do this hands-on, feel free to sign up for that. And also, when this period concludes, I'll go over to the Discord lounge and hang out there for a while if you have more questions. So I think, and here are some resources. I'll go back to the conclusion slide in a moment, but if anybody needs to snap a picture of this, you can get pretty much everything. There's a kit for helping you use this method in case you don't go to the tutorial, or even if you do, and it's got the forms, and there's a little video and a whole bunch of papers. And and if you're an open source person, we have a tool on there to help with the use of GenderMag. It's called the Recorder's Assistant. And if you want to help make that better, we welcome contributors on our open source site there. And that Recorder's Assistant is also available at the Google Chrome store if you just want to use it. It's free. The kit is free. Everything's free. So there you go. And if anybody wants to snap a picture or whatever, I'll pause here for a second, and then I'll go back to the conclusion slide, and I'm open for questions.
So, Margaret, thanks a lot. Do you want me to start asking the questions right now, or should we wait a bit?
Right now is great.
Okay. So we have a question asked by Claudia. She is my co-chair, co-PC chair. She's asking about the perceived social impact of people using gender inclusive software. Do you have any perception? For example, she cited two examples: if people increase the interaction, or if it facilitates people to adopt the software. So what is your perception of the improvements that is common to observe when the software is more inclusive in general or for gender, for example?
That's an awesome question. Thank you. So when you have inclusive software, your users like it better. And so what that can turn into, more users like it better. And so if we remember that awesome graph that I showed earlier. Oh, I see, Claudia. All right, I'm going to change my answer now that I see what you've put. It's a good question whether we've seen a perceived social impact. And all I have so far are anecdotes about this, but I am very optimistic about it. But I don't have anything in the way of hard proof. So, for example, one thing that I've seen is that when they're using GenderMag, the process, people who normally don't speak up in, say, a developer session, a design jam of some sort, they start speaking up. So, for example, if you have, a group of 6 developers and they're working on some product, and somebody says, "Well, I think we should add this cool new feature," and a whole bunch of people in the room get excited and they say, "Oh yeah, that would be so cool." But a couple of people think, "Wow, that looks cool but worthless." In the past, they've been afraid to sort of say that because it's like everybody else likes it. But with GenderMag, they don't have to say that they don't like it. They can say, "It is cool, but I don't think Abby will like it. I don't think Tim will use it." And so they can talk about it through the personas. And this empowers them to speak up in a non-confrontational way and opens the discussion to different points of view. And so I've seen this myself a lot, and people, and something I haven't seen, but other people have told me they've seen, is that developers get less defensive too. And so, so they just came up with this cool new idea, and they don't want their friends and teammates to say they don't like it. But when the developers and teammates are saying, "I do like it, but I don't think Abby's going to like it," they don't feel threatened and they don't get as defensive. So that it just makes the conversation go more smoothly. So that's one thing I've seen. We're starting to experiment with whether it changes the climate in the classroom too, whether using GenderMag changes the way students interact with each other. And we don't know the answer yet, but we're starting to gather data, and we hope that we know the answer within a few months. So stay tuned. My fingers are crossed.
Thanks, Margaret. In the meantime, we received some more questions here. I have some questions, but I can leave the questions to Discord if necessary. So Beatriz Marin just put a question here regarding the efforts, both the effort to apply GenderMag and the effort of having a software. I mean, the reduced effort after you have a software that's more inclusive. Can you discuss a bit the trade-off of efforts in this case? We put the question, the exact question in YouTube right now in the screen.
Yes. It's true that it adds, it seems like it adds effort when you just hear about it in a talk, because it is an extra thing you have to do up front. But some of the teams at my university have found that it saves effort later because they don't have to spend nearly as much time on customer support. So one of the teams said that the kinds of questions that she was getting, she was just getting a lot fewer questions. So it pays off in the end. And the reason is, and this is fairly well known in software engineering as well, that when you spend time up front to find problems, it's much cheaper to fix them than if you have to fix them later. And these inclusivity bugs, they lead to support problems. So I think that's probably why I've got this map up right now on my conclusion slide. That's probably why GenderMag has spread as far as it has. All of these countries in blue have gotten into using GenderMag. Somebody in those countries, sometimes more than one somebody, have gotten into using GenderMag, so they clearly think it pays off.
So, Margaret, I had a connection problem and I missed part of the answer, but I'm going to watch the video after the keynote. There is another question here by Marilia, and it touched somehow one question that I was intending to ask you. You are talking about finding and correcting inclusiveness.
Oh, Leo, I lost you.
Thinking about, can you hear me?
Could you start over? For a while you were gone.
Yeah, I'm having some connection problem here. So the question is, can you think about a way to have a inclusive software by design? The question by Marilia is, can we adapt the programming teaching disciplines to teach our students to create correct software in terms of inclusiveness instead of having inclusiveness bugs and fixing the bugs?
Yes. Thank you. That's an excellent question. Yes, I think that's possible. And it all kind of comes down to the facets. So if from the very beginning, people are thinking about the GenderMag facets like someone's risk aversion, let's say, some people are risk tolerant, some people are risk averse. So at the moment that they're creating the workflow, if they're thinking about that, then hopefully they won't put those bugs in the first place. And in fact, what some teams have started to do is they use something called GenderMag moments, which is described in the kit. It's doing a tiny bit of GenderMag in like 2 minutes. And so in their lab, they're very familiar with these facets, and they have posters of the personas around the lab to keep everybody familiar with them. And so somebody's working on some feature and they're saying, you know, I'm thinking about doing it this way. What do you think? And the person next to them says, will Abby do that? Will Tim do that? And so they just have a quick conversation about, oh yeah, I see, you know, Abby would do this, but Tim wouldn't, or Tim would do this, but Abby wouldn't. And they just, you know, allow that to affect their design decisions right then. And so it turns out that GenderMag is pretty flexible. So you can take pieces of it and move it around in the software lifecycle to help you start designing that way from the very beginning. At Cornell, they have a web development course that they offer on their eCampus, and they're starting to teach GenderMag exactly that way. And so they start by introducing these facets and the personas at the very beginning of their sequence, so that people are constantly designing around those personas and facets from the very outset. They've been doing it that way now for 2 or 3 years, so they must be pretty happy with the way it's working out. And I guess if you go to the Cornell eCampus web development sequence, you can maybe see a little bit of how they do that. And also, of course, if you start doing it, please let me know. We can add it to the GenderMag Teach collection. We welcome ideas and contributions so that we can share them around with everyone.
Thanks, Margaret. I think Tayana's question is more or less in the same direction, conceiving more inclusive software by design from scratch. I have a question here. It's a kind of a silly question, but when you're talking about the personas, you divided the screen in 2 parts. You put a bar, and you put the upper part. It's more, how can I say, less precise, I mean, and the second part is a more technical and precise. And my silly question is, the personas have pictures and have names. The selection, there is any risks or any hints about the selection of the pictures and the names? These characteristics, they may have some kind of influence in the perception of the people that are running GenderMag.
Yes, that's not a silly question at all. Thank you for asking. The first thing is there's, okay, part of what you didn't ask, but might have been wondering, is why we need a picture at all. And it turns out that there's a lot of human psychology behind what makes personas work. So way back before humans even developed language, they developed the ability to sort of build a model in their head about what other people could understand and could do. And so this is a hardwired human capability, and may be one of the main reasons we were able to advance as a species beyond where certain other species couldn't, is because we have these models that we can build in our heads of other people. But these models, this hardwiring, is about people, not about bullet lists. And so personas need to be set up as simulated people to activate those capabilities in our heads, to enable us to channel them and have empathy with them and be able to process them in the best way we humans can. So that's why we need to have a photo. Now, why those particular photos? No reason. You can put in any photo you want. We wanted photos that we could use freely, so we used photos that we either bought or made ourselves of our own students or our friends, and any photo will do for any of those personas. So then kind of getting beyond the photos, the rest of the stuff above that horizontal line that I drew, all of that is, or almost all of that, is completely customizable by a software developer. So they would typically put in whatever it is that defines their customer population. So if they're working on education software for, I don't know, grades kindergarten through 6th or something like that, then they would change the photo to a kid, and they might talk about the kid's hobbies and where they live and whether they're a good student or not. So those things, those demographic kinds of things that they need to be able to make the evaluation make any sense to them, given the software they're trying to evaluate. That's why the top is imprecise. It's just an example. You can just put in anything you need to demographically, but the bottom is, of course, fixed. Those are the problem-solving facets that people need to use when they do the evaluation.
Yeah, I think my question went in the direction of having everything fixed. If you change the picture, as people somehow internalize pictures and names, do you think the result of the method may be affected by the same persona with everything fixed, but the picture or but the name? That's more or less what I was trying to ask.
Mm-hmm. That's an interesting question.
Have you ever run such an experiment?
No, but we ran something kind of like it. In 2017, the CHI conference, CHI, the Human Computer Interaction one, we had a paper about whether people stereotyped using our personas. The answer was no. But we experimented with a version with only one picture of Abby, and a version with the four pictures of Abby, as you saw. And and what we found out is that people didn't spend much time looking at at any of those photos. They spent all their time looking at the facets. So we did that with eye tracking software. And so that's what we want. We really want them to pay attention to the facets.
Nice. And we have a comment here that is interesting. I will ask the staff to put in the slide from Marcella. She notes that most of people that are in the session ask questions or put in comment, they are women. So she's asking if the participants that are interested in this kind of issues, they are gender biased somehow. Do you think it makes sense?
It has been my experience that women are among those who feel like they're finally being listened to when GenderMag comes up. All these years of fighting with software that the men around them seem to like, and they always thought maybe it was them. They are finally saying, "Oh, I get it. It's about biases. I'm so glad someone's talking about this." So they do seem to disproportionately get excited about this. If whether that introduces bias, I don't in the process. I don't think so, because remember, the developers choose the persona or the personas that they want to evaluate. Oh, I see, Marcella. I see it written down now. Yes, you are right. It should not only be like this. It is very important for everyone to be involved. It's not just important to women that everyone be involved. It's important to everyone that everyone be involved. Why? Because this is not a woman's problem. This is a software problem. And when you get the biases out of software, you make that software better. And when you make that software better, you save money. And you make more money because you have bigger market share. So it is in everyone's best interests to be involved in this. And if the only people who are involved in this are women, then the women's products will be better. And those are the people who will make money.
That's an excellent answer. Thanks a lot, Margaret. I have a last question here. You talked about fixing an issue and actually unbalancing the effect, and you fix for someone, but you increase the issue for the other group, and this is not desired. If you analyze the personas, is it possible to generalize this kind of situation and detect profiles that are incompatible? I mean, is it possible to know by design that is basically impossible to satisfy two kinds of people if they are willing to use the software?
Thank you for that question. I really appreciate it. That question touches on the trade-off issue, and I call it the dreaded trade-off issue, because trade-offs is absolutely not what we want. Inclusivity is never about making things worse for one group to make them better for another. So in most cases, when someone says it won't be possible to make this work for both people, in most cases when they say that, they're just being lazy. There usually is a way to make it better for everyone, or at least to make it better for one group and no worse for the other. It's just that it's so easy to say, oh, it's not possible. And so my usual answer is think harder. But there are situations where all you can do is trade off. And so far in my experiences, those are very rare. But they can arise, and then you just have to make a choice about where you want to be based on your customer base or the market share that you're trying to reach, or whatever it is. But I haven't seen it very much. Just as one example, let's consider tooltips. So everyone might think, oh, tooltips, those are gender neutral, but they're not. What they favor is people who have a selective information processing style. That's Tim. They don't favor people who have a comprehensive style like Abby. So what's in a tooltip? A tiny little bit of information, perfect for selective processors. And so now that we know that, oh my gosh, that's biased against people who want comprehensive information. Then we say, well, how can we help them? And the wrong answer would be, well, we'll just make tooltips have paragraphs and paragraphs, because that would flip the balance the other way. It would make Abby happy and Tim unhappy. So we don't want that. And so then we say, well, then how about if we make the amount of information in tooltips be flexible? So when you first hover over a tooltip, there's a tiny little information like there's always been. But if you pin it, you can then expand it. And you can leave it up there on the screen as long as you want until you dismiss it. In fact, an education package called Gidget, which is available online too. I think it's called helpgidget.org by Michael Lee and Amy Coe. That software uses those kinds of tooltips because they found problems using GenderMag. Anyway, and they found that it was tremendously successful. So there's almost always a way.
Thanks a lot, Margaret. We are almost at our finishing time. I would like to thank you very much again for this wonderful talk and for your receptiveness to attend our community and serve our community. We had lots of changes during the year, the place and the media, and you were always there together with us. So thank you very, very much for delivering this talk to us. And I expect to have you and receive you in Brazil in person soon without pandemic, and we can talk in person. Thanks a lot.
Wonderful. Wonderful. It was my pleasure. Thank you. And I'll go over to the Discord room as soon as I can find it and hang out there for a while in case people want to talk more.
Thank you.